What's up, everybody, and welcome into a breaking news edition of the PHNX Suns podcast. I'm Eric, rocking it solo this morning as last night Chris Haynes broke the news. According to a Haynes brief, hashtag Haynes brief, the Phoenix Suns, Mike Budenholzer, will be benching Bradley Beal and Jusuf Nurkic in place of Ryan Dunn and Mason Plumlee later tonight as the Phoenix Suns take on the Philadelphia 76ers. I want to thank all of you for coming in here early this morning. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you hitting that like button, subscribing to PHNX Sports. If you're new around here, we will have a pregame show and we'll have a postgame show for the Suns-Sixers game tonight. Of course, talking about everything Bradley Beal, Jusuf Nurkic related. Appreciate all of you in the chat. Sandman, Chris, Starter Pack, Kara, Anton. We appreciate all of you being in here right now. Make sure that you let me know down below what you think about Mike Budenholzer benching Bradley Beal and Jusuf Nurkic. I think the first and foremost thing that we have to talk about before we get to basketball fit, which we are going to get to, is the fact that Bradley Beal, widely regarded as a player with his price tag that would not be able to come off the bench just according to the dynamics of the team, about approaching a guy like that and asking him to come off the bench. You're not asking him, you're telling him Bradley Beal and Jusuf Nurkic coming off the bench. Let's start with Bradley Beal. Ben says it feels like a new era. And I don't know if it feels like a new era, but it definitely feels like an era of decision. Like we had to do something. We talked about it on the PHNX Suns postgame show recently after the most recent loss. And we said the time for action is now, whether it's a small trade, whether it's a big trade, whether it's a Jimmy Butler-esque trade. The Suns needed to show that what was going on right now was not okay. And this is a pretty clear way to send a message and saying, hey, two of our starters, two of our higher paid players, one of our three highest paid players in Bradley Beal, you are going to go to the bench when I do not see on the court you bringing as much positives as you should. And we mentioned Bradley Beal against the Indiana Pacers. There's that play against Pascal Siakam where he doesn't box out, Siakam hits the fadeaway, then Siakam runs and grabs the board and puts it back in. And I do feel like that just captured where the vibes were with this team. And if you see that as a coach and you see that as somebody who has been watching basketball for his entire life in Mike Budenholzer and watched this team last year go through all of its struggles and hit a similar low point before turning it around, he's well aware of what this team needs for morale purposes, for connectivity purposes, and Bradley Beal being in the starting lineup just wasn't cutting it. He was too reductive next to Devin Booker, as much as I maybe would have liked to think that that wasn't the case when they first traded for Bradley Beal. I imagined a world where Bradley Beal and Devin Booker can occupy similar spaces on the court at the same time, going back and forth and saying, hey, this is my turn, this is your turn. We have this beautiful chemistry that we're able to figure out. But instead, it just felt like they were overlapping and getting in each other's way. And that is the big problem that Mike Budenholzer was facing. And now that Bradley Beal's moving to the bench, you imagine Devin Booker can come out more in killer mode, come out more in that score first. I'm going to put my foot down on the gas and I'm going to come out and take over for this team like I had been in previous iterations. And Bradley Beal moving to the bench allows him more freedom. Of course, in theory that you could talk about this, Bradley Beal maybe going to the bench could be worse for the vibes. Maybe trying to send a message to this team is not the type of group of guys who would resonate, right? But Scott says a good coach makes changes to get the best out of his team, regardless of salary, contracts, and all the noise. This is a good move. Optical Illusion says the worst part is that for most of the season, Beal has been more consistent and better than Booker. I don't know if he's been better than Booker. I think there have been a couple moments where Devin Booker has been up and down so far this season, and where you could say through stretches Bradley Beal had been more consistent. But as of late, I mean, you had one of Bradley Beal's best games of the season coming on Christmas, followed immediately afterwards by his worst game of the season. You had Bradley Beal starting the game against the Indiana Pacers, hitting a couple of shots, ending that game 3 for 12. I wouldn't say he's been more consistent at all. And Meatloaf says Beal doesn't fit in the starting lineup unless he plays a passing PG, and we don't need that. And this was something that I talked about on PHNX Suns, where whether it was benching Bradley Beal or it was benching Tyus Jones, you go to those players not because you're approaching them and saying, hey, you're really bad at basketball. You're no longer a starting caliber player in this league, and you just need to go to the bench because you're not cutting it. You approach those two players because of the build and the fit of your team. Your team is desperately in need of defense, size, length, energy. And even though Bradley Beal on the defensive end has brought a good amount of energy, somewhat inconsistently, but at times been extremely locked in and one of the Suns' better perimeter defenders, it still doesn't matter because of his size. And especially when he's on the court sharing it with a Tyus Jones, who's extremely undersized, extremely small, gets targeted every single time he's down on the court defensively. And then Devin Booker, who we've seen lock in on defense, especially in that playoff run where he was averaging 30 plus and getting a block and a steal a game. But we haven't seen that same defensive intensity and the same defensive output from him over the last 2 seasons. And you have to imagine part of that is because of who he is having to guard, because of who's in the starting lineup with him when it comes to Bradley Beal. Rohit says the Suns are paying Beal $50 million just to throw bricks. I think with this move, with Beal specifically, you're hoping that if he can approach it, I guess correctly, maybe for lack of a better term, you can't really tell somebody how to feel about something like this, and maybe he's sour on it. Maybe he just wants a trade now and he's willing to waive his no trade to anywhere else, which is a side of the equation we'll get to in a second. But with Bradley Beal, you can approach him, and there is a way where you can frame this as this is better for you. Because when you watch the Phoenix Suns play basketball, it's very clear that the fit with Bradley Beal on the court with the big three is not working. Whether it's eye test, just seeing how they operate, seeing how long it takes for them to get into offensive sets when Bradley Beal is pounding the air out of the basketball, even when Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and Tyus Jones are on the court as well. Or if you look at the statistics and the numbers, an on-off rating, an offensive rating, defensive rating, the big three, and especially Devin Booker and Bradley Beal specifically as a duo, do not have good numbers when it comes to any of the major statistical categories, including defensive rating, which is where the Suns needed to shore up. So if you approach Beal and you say, listen, in an ideal world, somebody of your salary, of your skill level, with your skill set, you'd be starting, right? On a lot of teams in the NBA, you'd be starting. But specifically for the Phoenix Suns, which is the team that you're on and the team that you want to win a championship, the reason why you came here is because you wanted to be here. What works best for us is taking somebody who's talented like you in the ways that you are and moving you to the bench to open you up, allow you to be your full self, your full shot creator, Washington Wizards Bradley Beal, who when he knows that he's the number one offensive option on the court, when he knows that the ball should be going through his hands, he should be making the decisions and quite frankly, taking most of the shots, then he feels free. Then maybe you can go out there and say, Bradley Beal, you can find that joy in basketball that you were missing last season. You can go and play like the type of player that it feels like you are most effective, because putting you in the starting lineup with this big three has not felt like it's come out effective, has not seen effectiveness when it comes to the win-loss column. And now you're 3 games under 500 in a season where you're supposed to be competing at the top of the West. We need to change something. And that's you, Bradley Beal, reallocating your positives and trying to take away from your negatives by moving your position to the bench. Strikeout says Vogel would never. You know, as much as I was on the Vogel, I'd say bandwagon of not really liking what he was doing, it was pretty clear not a lot of Suns fans were really enjoying the end of the Frank Vogel tenure. You do have to admit that if you look at the Suns at a similar spot, let's say Christmas last season, and what they did afterwards, they basically won at a 550 pace after Christmas, which we hit an extremely low point where even Frank Vogel's job started to become in question. Now you look at Mike Budenholzer and you say, okay, can you do the same thing? Can you find something out of this team that is clearly below expectations internally and externally, and find a way to get the most out of them and have them play winning basketball? At this point, screw being a top 4 seed in the West, right? Like screw being a championship contender. This team barely has a shot statistically at making the actual playoffs beyond the play-in, right? That's not acceptable. That's not okay. So can you, Mike Budenholzer, do what needs to be done to fix this ship, because as much as we say this season feels like last season, it actually feels a lot worse, which is why drastic measures, like last year it was trading for Royce O'Neal. This year it might be trading for Jimmy Butler, might be making multiple trades. It starts with what can we get with Bradley Beal off the bench? But it's beyond the court, like we mentioned. And before we talk about that, I want to remind everybody, Outside Shots is going to be live right after this at 9 o'clock. So once this stream ends, you're going to stay on PHNX Sports. You're going to hit that subscribe button. You're going to hit that notifications button as well. Then you're going to tune in to Saul Bookman, Eddie Johnson, giving their thoughts about Bradley Beal being benched. Of course, Eddie, one of the best six men in NBA history, winning an NBA Six Man of the Year award. You might want to tune into what he has to say about a dynamic, prolific scorer who has a great jump shot coming off of the bench. Seems like a pretty good perspective to have, and only a perspective that you can get right here on PHNX Sports. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed. Of course, we also have Sun Devils, Wildcats, Cardinals coverage every single day. Our Diamondbacks coverage will be revamped soon enough. Make sure you just hit that subscribe button so you know when all that's happening. But there's an elephant in the room, right? There's the beyond basketball part about all of this when it comes to benching Bradley Beal. And yes, Jusuf Nurkic as well. And we'll get to Nurk because that seems like just as big of a deal almost as Bradley Beal if it didn't come with the price tag. There's the trade part of it all. There's the Jimmy Butler looming dangerously overhead to everybody in the Valley, where Bradley Beal famously has a no trade clause. Bradley Beal's famously in control of where his next destination is going to be. It's why he's ended up in Phoenix, coming from Washington. And it's why the next team that he's on will need to be the team that Bradley Beal wants to be on. And this could be some hardball from the Suns. It could not be. Bradley Beal could be fully on board, bought in, ready to attack this new role is the most professional way possible. He might be doing that either way, just when it comes to how he is acting around the team, how he's playing on the court. But there's also a side of this where Bradley Beal might become jaded. Bradley Beal came to Phoenix because he was looking for a home. He was looking for a place to win. And even though you can look at Bradley Beal and say that is on you for not being able to fit in, and now at a certain points we're questioning your effort when it comes to fitting in as to why it didn't work. In the grand scheme of things, you're merely just a cog in a broken machine that's not working. But we need to try to fix it by any means. And even though you came here to try and win, you came here to get out of Washington, we might need to send you away to a team in a different position so that we can avoid becoming a team like that. That's a difficult situation to grasp as a player like Bradley Beal, who does have the confidence to be somebody who's averaged 30 plus points per game in a season twice in the NBA. I don't care when, I don't care how long ago. That's still impressive. And that's still something that you as a person would hold on to. So now you approach that guy who moved his family out here, wanted to find a new home, was excited to be a part of a quote unquote big three, excited to be a part of a winning franchise aimed at winning the ultimate goal, an NBA championship, intangibly seeing that, right? Like coming here and seeing the path. And now you're at a point where you have two options, which is either come off the bench for the first time in the past decade, or it's accept a trade, probably not to Miami because they're pretty vehemently anti-getting Beal. Maybe they become desperate, which with where the Jimmy situation has come and how little the offers coming in are. But right now, Miami not interested in Beal from everything that we're hearing from Mark Stein, who talked to Espo right here on PHNX Sports and beyond. You have to now find a different place for him to go, for him to want to be able to go. But maybe this is the hardball of, oh, you don't like coming off the bench? You don't like your new rearranged role? That's okay. We'll get you out of here. We'll trade you anywhere else. How about random third team involved in this Miami trade? You can either stay here, stay off the bench, buy into your new role, or you can waive your no trade clause and you can go somewhere else. Your two options, you can take it. That's playing hardball. And that's something that it feels like the Phoenix Suns are almost being forced to do at this point, because what other options do they have as far as rearranging this roster, trading Josh Okogie and a second round pick for Nick Richards, with the point that the Phoenix Suns are in right now with Josh Okogie? Do you want to look to trade him for somebody on the margins? Welding says just trade Nurkic. I'm not sure you're going to be able to trade Nurkic without attaching some sort of value to him. I'm not, and there's no world where I'm attaching a first round pick to Nurkic unless I'm getting something of incredible value for this season back. And by, I guess, incredible value, I mean something that you could see benefiting you when it comes to a deep playoff run. That is your only first round pick you have right now. And for most teams that take Jusuf Nurkic, you'd have to attach it to him. You want to trade a couple seconds? Well, then you're getting rid of your maneuverability to make moves along the margins, right? Making one of those smaller trades, whether it is for Nick Richards or another player who's been reportedly available for a couple second round picks. You start limiting your options if you're trading Jusuf Nurkic for anything attaching salary with him. And you're not going to be getting any sort of picks and probably nothing likely of value back in a straight up Jusuf Nurkic trade. I guess crazier things have happened in the NBA, but you can realistically assume he's going to fetch you no value, right? Rohit says, do you think trading Grayson is a good thing? I wouldn't necessarily consider that a good thing in a vacuum. Grayson Allen's a great 3-point shooter. I think he's played under his contract value so far this season, so you would be trading low on him. And the type of skill set that he brings is singular to anybody on this team, despite, yes, being a little bit of an undersized forward guard who would have to play in a lot of small ball lineups and would get attacked on defense, even though he's a little bigger and can hold his own a little bit more this year. I wouldn't say it's a good thing, but it might be one of your only options to trade as far as value for contract goes if Bradley Beal's not going to be somebody getting moved for Jimmy Butler. But back to Beal, right? You're now looking at we can approach you and we can say, this is how it is. You can either like it or you can not like it. Mike Budenholzer, I would say he's playing hardball. I think he's just making what he feels like is the best decision on the court. And that in turn can come off as playing hardball with somebody like Bradley Beal, who's in his position, who has all the control when it comes to a trade. But if you can get Bradley Beal now to accept waiving his no trade clause or to accept coming off the bench, that's a massive, massive win for the Suns. Because I think there is a world where Bradley Beal off the bench and a move along the margins to shore up your center position actually works for this team. Maybe it's a long shot because the big problem we've seen with Phoenix now is the chemistry, the quote unquote vibes, the effort, the connectivity on the court, where you're thinking to yourself, this is just a group of guys who don't seem like they believe in each other to get it done. There doesn't seem to be that baseline level of trust that's needed to be a championship team. You look at somebody like OKC or Boston, right? They played a fantastic game over the weekend. And they have great talent. They have some of the best, if not the most talent in the league individually on their rosters. They're also two of the most connected teams in the NBA, two of the most well-coached teams in the NBA with a very clear-cut identity every single time they step on the court. So maybe you look at this team and say, unless you can get to that point where you buy in, and maybe with this group of guys, no matter if somebody's benched or starting, you don't think you can get there, then that's a different conversation. But putting that aside and just exploring a reality where Bradley Beal is fully bought in off the bench, you make a move around the center rotation, because I do think that's where a massive part of all the doubt coming internally is knowing that when you throw it down low, you don't have an offensive option who can get you an efficient shot around the rim or not turn the ball over or not be emotional when it comes to pushing and shoving and getting suspended. Like, there's a difference between showing fight and being irrational and immature. And I think Jusuf Nurkic's brawl with Najee Marshall that he instigated falls more into the latter end of those. Maybe you can't talk this group of guys into buying in, but you can't talk them into buying in with the status quo, with the same old, same old. So you make the move to the bench, which is maybe your precursor to trades. You see how the team responds. Ryan Dunn is absolutely infectious. When he plays along the stars, you can tell defensively that his effort, his energy, his IQ does rub off on all of the other players that are playing next to him as well. Plus, his rebounding is a really massive plus for this team. You can say the same with Josh Okogie when he's in. His pure effort and hustle on the offensive boards unlocks a ton for this team, especially when they're struggling to get up more shots than their opponent, which that's been happening lately. And then you still, after benching Jusuf Nurkic, have to deal with Mason Plumlee, who's been an okay backup big, but his finishing around the rim has fallen off significantly over the past couple of years. And that's not something to where if you're Kevin Durant, if you're Devin Booker, if you're Tyus Jones, you can call for a screen, go off into the elbow, have somebody rolling in, and feel like if I dump it down low, they can find a high quality shot and finish consistently. You don't really have that trust in this team right now. So maybe it helps moving Bradley Beal, Jusuf Nurkic to the bench, purely chemistry alone. Everybody clicks in better. Devin Booker and Kevin Durant feel like they can operate in a better space. Bradley Beal's bought in as this supercharged scoring option off the bench that you can tap into to come in and just kind of press the gas pedal against certain teams. Right? You look at some of the best six man in history. If you look at a Jamal Crawford, a Lou Williams, and Eddie Johnson, right? These microwaves that can heat up off the bench in an instant. Maybe Bradley Beal, it's time for you, contract assigned, to fit into that role. And maybe you find joy there. And maybe the Suns find joy there. But it's always felt like there's been multiple steps needed to get to a point where the Phoenix Suns are quote unquote fixed. And I don't know if just benching these two and even specifically benching Jusuf Nurkic gets you closer to that. But Cedric has a thought, a $2 super chat. Thank you, Cedric. If you guys want your thoughts read right here, live on air, drop a super chat and guarantee you we will be talking about that here. We still appreciate Meatloaf, Strikeout, Anthony, Michael, Cedric, who dropped the super chat, Sean, Cody, True Tactive, Zero Dark 30, Mike Budenholzer's clipboard is in here after making a pretty massive decision. Thank you, Bud's clipboard for jumping in here. But Cedric with a $2 super chat says, IMO, Book, Beal, and Nurkic can go. Play, bowl, no more. I wouldn't say I fully understand Suns fans being out on Devin Booker. I think it's extremely fair to say that he has not played his best basketball. This has been the worst year of what you would consider Devin Booker's prime. He's not been consistent on either ends of the floor. He still hit the heights that we've seen Devin be able to hit as far as 40-plus point games this season a few times. But it doesn't just feel like it's the same Devin Booker out there. I'm not ready to give up on Devin Booker. I won't be ready to give up on Devin Booker for quite some time. I want Devin Booker in a Phoenix Suns uniform for as long as Devin Booker wants to be in a Phoenix Suns uniform, which I'm hoping is for the rest of his career. But I appreciate your opinion. I think with the way the Phoenix Suns have been playing, the lack of joy, the way that the fan base is becoming increasingly apathetic or angry, I can't necessarily blame you for feeling how you're feeling. I just personally, I'm not looking at Book for anything except for he just needs to be better. And I'm not ready to trade him. I'm not ready to ask for him to be traded for a very, very, very long time until maybe you get to the point where Devin no longer wants to be in Phoenix. And I just don't think we're there yet. Andy says that he wouldn't trade Book. Kara says Book isn't going anywhere, people. You want to talk about playing Bull more? I think that you saw the classic Bull experience in the last game. I don't know if Jusuf Nurkic is going to be dropped out of the rotation entirely. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't exactly know how Jusuf Nurkic is going to respond to being benched. Bradley Beal, I think, is way more likely to fall into the category of basketball player who feels like they're a starter, who knows that they can play at a starter level, but is more willing to accept a role off the bench for the greater good of the team. And maybe it's different because I'm not in the locker room. I can only observe based off of what I see on the court, what I hear from all the post-game sound that Gerald sends. It doesn't feel like Jusuf Nurkic is the type of player, at least right now, that is responding to adversity well. Whether it's adversity in the form of being called out on social media and him seemingly online a lot, especially calling out people who have talked about him, or if it's on the court, committing an offensive foul after earlier in the game, not having the type of hustle to run back on the other end of the court when your team was going 4-on-5 and you were stopping and talking to the Mavs bench because they were getting in your head. Whether it's the response after the offensive foul where sure, I'm sure Najee Marshall and I'm sure PJ Washington, I'm sure they said some things and they instigated, and of course Najee swung afterwards, and Najee continued to try to invoke a fight afterwards. I'm not saying that Jusuf Nurkic is the only one with blame, but I hated that line of thinking. I hated where his head was at. And I overall enjoy the enforcer mentality in the NBA. I think that a lot of teams need an enforcer. I don't like Draymond Green, but I can appreciate what Draymond Green brings to a team. I don't like Dillon Brooks, but I can appreciate what Dillon Brooks brings to a team. But those guys are consistent in what they do. Jusuf Nurkic hasn't been. And so I don't know if Jusuf Nurkic coming off the bench is going to play with the renewed sense of energy, a renewed vigor, something that ignites him and has him stay locked in and play closer to the level he did last season, which was not a perfect player, but one that was a positive for the Suns, one that led to the Suns having a positive net rating when he was on the floor, and at a certain point not even being able to win games unless he was playing. I don't know if he's the type of player to respond that way to being benched. I hope that being benched ignites some sort of fire in Jusuf Nurkic that stops him from complaining to the refs every time there's some marginal contact down low. You're a 7 foot, 300-pound big man. You're going to get not the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the whistle. Stop complaining mid-play and allowing an offensive rebound. Stop screaming at the opposing bench while your other team is going down 4-on-5. Maybe he'll be more locked in when it comes to finishing around the paint. I don't know. I don't know if moving him to the bench is the answer, but I know keeping him in the starting lineup wasn't the solution. The reality of the story is these are drastic measures. A team that's in a good place, which all of you know the Phoenix Suns are not in a good place, does not do something like this. But the worst possible thing was to just sit back and let it all play out and let it all happen. And this might be a precursor to show that come trade deadline, as we get closer, heck, maybe come later today after this Sixers game, which of course we have pre and post game shows for tonight. Maybe after that, these big trades, these big moves are talked more into as Jimmy Butler stays suspended, and maybe Bradley Beal and Jusuf Nurkic don't bring the amount of energy and quote unquote togetherness that they should be bringing off the bench because they're humans, because they feel disrespected, because maybe they feel like it's unfair, right? It's all on the table. It's all on the table for the Phoenix Suns. The best case, the worst case, the middle case scenario, a scenario where they make a bunch of trades, a scenario where they make one big trade, a scenario where they make no trades at all. This might be the biggest move of the Suns season. And maybe we're all being too jaded, and eventually it's going to end up being the best move of the Suns season, and maybe this unlocks it. I don't know. The only thing that's going to tell is time, and PHNX Suns is going to be here every step along the way, not just with our pre and post-game shows later tonight, but of course with Outside Shots, which is going to be coming live at 9 o'clock from this very channel. Eddie Johnson, Saul Bookman continuing to talk about Jusuf Nurkic, Bradley Beal moving to the bench in favor of Ryan Dunn and Mason Plumlee. Drop your comments down below, your final grades for this move from Mike Budenholzer. Make sure you hit that like, make sure you subscribe as well. Again, you'll catch you guys later today for more PHNX Suns, and follow us on social media at PHNX_Suns. Follow myself at ERIKRUBY, and stay tuned. Outside Shots coming to you live, coming up next.
We all silly like the mayor.